Donald Trump's return to the White House is shaking up global diplomacy. With his recent controversial statements, NATO allies are grappling to figure out what his leadership means for them. Could this be the breaking point? Can NATO hold together with Trump in charge? Or is this the time when the alliance breaks apart, putting Europe at risk like it was during the Cold War? Let's see how these recent political changes in the US might impact EU defense and even your security.
I'm also going to ask all NATO nations to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP.
Donald Trump has never been one to mince words, and his latest demand has left NATO allies in deep shock. In January 2025, just weeks into his second term, Trump took to the world stage again, with a drastic proposal that left many military and political analysts going around in circles. What did he say this time? He declared that NATO members must increase their defense spending to 5% of their gross domestic product, more than double the current requirement of 2%. What could be his reason for taking such a stance? Trump criticized NATO, saying America has been shouldering the burden for too long by investing billions in European defense. He noted that other allied countries contribute much less. If they won't defend themselves, why should we? He asked during a heated press conference at the White House. Over the last decade, NATO has required its members to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense, a target agreed upon during the 2014 NATO summit in Wales. Yet, as of 2024, only 24 out of the alliance's 32 member states met that benchmark. Countries like Estonia, Poland, and Greece have long exceeded the 2% mark due to Russian aggression in recent years. However, other economic powerhouses such as Germany, Canada, and Italy have all struggled to reach that threshold, as they often cite economic constraints or a shift in local priorities. In response to Trump's push for an increase to 5%, most European capitals, as German Chancellor Annalena Baerbock called the demand unrealistic and unsustainable, warning that it could destabilize the economies of multiple European nations. French President Emmanuel Macron, who has long advocated for Europe's strategic autonomy, stated that while France remains committed to NATO, it must also protect its economic interests. At the same time, the UK's Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer took a cautious stance on the issue. He acknowledged the need for greater defense spending in the region but did not fully endorse Trump's requests. If Germany, which happens to be the largest economy in Europe, were to raise its defense budget from the current 1.6% to 5%, it would mean an additional 150 billion euros per year, a figure nearly equal to its entire healthcare budget. The same applies to other NATO nations, forcing governments to choose between defense and domestic priorities. This leaves us with one question. Can Europe fundamentally reshape its economies to focus on defense? Since assuming office in late January of 2025, Trump has repeatedly made headlines as regards the US and NATO. He once stated, if members fail to meet the new target, the US will be reassessing its military commitments in Europe. This statement reignited fears of American withdrawal, echoing his first presidency when he repeatedly criticized NATO as obsolete. Will European nations cave to Trump's demands, drastically overhauling their military budgets? Or will they push back and risk a rift with the US that could alter NATO forever? Let's take on another US policy that is causing a wave of speculation in NATO. If Trump's defense spending demand shook NATO, some of his foreign policy statements at the start of 2025 sent shockwaves worldwide.
We need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time.
In a surprising turn, Trump again revived his 2019 proposal to purchase Greenland from Denmark. This time, however, it came with a stronger argument, one that is directly tied to NATO's strategic position in the Arctic. Greenland, a self-governing territory under Denmark's rule, is home to the Thule Air Base. The base is the US military's distant North Base, integral to its vast missile defense and Arctic surveillance. In a televised interview on Fox News this month, Trump declared Greenland as key to American security and said, quite frankly, Denmark is holding it back. It belongs to American hands. The comment reopened hostilities between Copenhagen and Washington, with Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen again rejecting the idea as absurd. Trump's new interest in bringing Greenland back under US control has sparked discussions about America's role in the Arctic. As Russia and China increase their activity in the region, some defense experts in the US believe that controlling Greenland could boost NATO's defenses. However, not everyone agrees. European leaders, including European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, find Trump's comments worrying. She warned that this push could damage the relationship between the US and Europe at a time when they need to stand together. While everyone thought this move by Trump was his boldest geopolitical proposal so far, he spilled another statement that was yet as controversial as his very persona: the reacquisition of the Panama Canal. In an off-the-cuff remark during a rally in Orlando, Florida, he suggested that the United States reclaim control of the canal. The Panama Canal, which was controlled by the US until 1999, remains a significantly vital trade route in the region. The strategically significant route joins the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Trump's comment indicated that America ought to re-establish control over the canal to secure its place in global trade and increase national security. Panamanian President Jose Raul Mulino responded swiftly and harshly, announcing that the area would not watch in silence while sovereignty is breached. Other Latin American leaders condemned Trump's statements, announcing that in the event that there was a move to trespass into the canal, it would be labeled as an act of aggression. Would his administration pursue such aggressive land deals? Could the US engage in possible territorial conflicts under his leadership? European leaders worried that such moves could distract both world powers from pressing security concerns, especially as tensions with Russia and China continue to rise. Trump's vision for Greenland and the Panama Canal is not just about territorial acquisition, but about redefining American power on the global stage. With his allies in NATO already struggling to keep up with his defense spending demands, Trump's geopolitical ambitions are testing the limits of the US and European relations like never before. How does this affect even the ordinary man? If Trump could commence his new regime with these fierce political shifts, what other changes should we expect? Historically, many European NATO nations have relied heavily on the United States military, as they often allocate less than the previously agreed upon 2% of their GDP to defense. This new demand has prompted a significant shift in national and regional mindset, with member states recognizing the urgent need to enhance their military capabilities. Macron described Trump's policy as a shock and urged Europe to take more responsibility for its defense and have fewer dependencies on others. In response, France increased investments in modernizing all defense infrastructure, focusing on updating its military forces and developing advanced defense technology. Germany, Europe's largest economy, has been cautious in its military engagement since the Second World War. But with the heat being put on it, Chancellor Olaf Scholz's administration has vowed to boost Germany's defense spending budget to achieve and possibly exceed the 2% GDP benchmark. This involves procuring new materials, enhancing cybersecurity levels, and improving readiness by national forces. Germany is also attempting to form alliances with other NATO countries to develop the nation's defense hardware, justifying the necessity of putting up a unified European face. The United Kingdom, though not an EU member anymore but a key NATO ally, has also responded to the changing geopolitical landscape in recent years. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has proposed raising defense spending to 2.5% of GDP, with negotiations in place to set a 2.65% goal potentially. The hike aims to boost Britain's military presence worldwide, particularly in Europe. Britain is investing in next-generation fighter jets, expanding its naval fleet, and upgrading its cyber war division. Besides this, London is also seeking closer defense cooperation with European countries that recognize the common good of collaborative security interests. Beyond individual national efforts, there's a growing need to establish an independent EU defense structure. And in response to this, the concept called Weimar Plus has emerged, which expands the original Weimar Triangle that comprises France, Germany, and Poland to include the UK, Spain, Italy, and the European Commission. This new alliance aims to promote European sovereignty and reduce reliance on the US by coordinating defense policies, pooling resources, and jointly developing military capabilities. The inaugural meeting in Paris on February 12, 2025 signaled the urgency of a cohesive European defense strategy, especially in light of recent US policy shifts. However, the path to a unified European defense will not be a smooth ride. Different political views, varying opinions on threats, and the economic gap among member states will make it hard to reach an agreement. One topic on the table is the idea of joint borrowing, similar to the Recovery and Resilience Facility started in 2021. These efforts aim to help share the costs among all member states, promote unity, and protect smaller economies from being hit the hardest. Still, some EU countries are against this, worried about taking on shared debt and ending up with larger debts, which might impact their credit ratings. For instance, in Italy, where public debt is already well over 140% of its GDP, meeting Trump's demands would require a deep cut in other areas of the economy. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has faced internal resistance from opposition parties and even some within her government who argue that increasing military spending should not come at the expense of social welfare programs. Italy already has one of the lowest birth rates in Europe and is struggling with an aging population, which makes healthcare and pension reforms a top priority for the government. However, to stay aligned with NATO and meet its obligations, Meloni has been considering reallocating funds from infrastructure projects and green energy initiatives towards strengthening its defense. the economic implications are held within some nations and affect the overall European Union's economy. The European Central Bank issued a warning stating that if massive amounts of money were channeled into defense, it would likely stall investment in important industries such as technology, education, and energy. Christine Lagarde, the ECB's president, has advised caution, emphasizing that while security is crucial to governance, policymakers must find a sustainable way to balance economic growth with military expansion. European nations are the largest buyers of American-made military equipment, including fighter jets, tanks, and missile defense systems. Suppose NATO members, which are mostly made up of EU countries, are forced to increase their spending on defense dramatically. Some nations may decide to diversify their suppliers, potentially turning to French, German, or even Chinese defense manufacturers to reduce dependency on the US. This shift could create more subtle tensions between Washington and Brussels, as US defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon could see a decline in European contracts. Another economic angle to Trump's demand is its impact on European industries outside of defense. If NATO member states decide to pump more billions into military expansion, other critical industries such as automobiles, green energy, and digital technology may receive less funding. This could slow Europe's progress in renewable energy and AI-driven industries, where the EU has recently tried competing with China and the United States. If defense spending takes priority over these future-focused sectors, Europe could lose its edge in global innovation. One solution being considered to counter this is a joint European defense investment plan, where countries contribute to a collective military budget rather than each nation increasing its spending alone. This would allow the smaller member states, such as Estonia, Latvia, and Portugal, to be included in NATO's goals without overstretching their economies. Such a proposal, however, requires consensus among EU members, and not all governments would agree on how the defense funds are to be shared. While some European citizens support increased military spending due to rising threats from Russia and China, others see it as a wasteful diversion from healthcare, education, and job creation. Recent polls across Germany, France, and Spain suggest that while security concerns are at an all-time high, support for massive military spending remains mixed. There's also a more profound political question. Is Trump's demand truly about strengthening NATO, or is it a way to pressure Europe into economic submission? Some analysts believe Trump's 5% target is less about military necessity and more about forcing Europe to rely on United States weapons, oil, and financial systems. If Europe bends to Trump's demands, it may be more economically tied to Washington's foreign policy objectives. Well, this is something that EU leaders like Macron and Scholz have continued to warn against. What happens if NATO should in any way become a broken record under the US's new foreign policy? For decades, NATO has stood as the cornerstone of European security, a military alliance built on the idea that an attack on one is an attack on all. It has deterred Russian aggression, maintained order through the Cold War, and expanded to include former Soviet states seeking protection from their once dominant neighbor. But now, NATO faces a new crisis from within. With President Donald Trump back in the White House, his latest policies and rhetoric are shaking the alliance's foundation in unprecedented ways. The United States has long been NATO's backbone, contributing the largest share of its military resources, intelligence capabilities, and troop deployments. European countries, even those with strong economies, have relied on this security umbrella. However, Trump's America First philosophy has revived his argument that the United States should no longer foot the bill for European defense, especially for nations he claims aren't paying their fair share. This sentiment, coupled with his skepticism about NATO's effectiveness, has left many questioning whether NATO can survive intact if the US significantly scales back its military presence. The most vulnerable nations in NATO, the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, are particularly concerned with the latest development. These countries have been on high alert ever since Russia annexed Crimea back in 2014, and its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. If Trump follows his suggestion to withdraw troops from NATO's Eastern Front, it could expose them dangerously. In these nations, US military bases and rotating deployments have been a major defense against Russian aggression. A reduced US presence would force these smaller countries to seek new ways to strengthen their defenses, whether by forming regional security pacts or increasing military reliance on stronger NATO allies like Germany, France, or Poland. But then, this isn't restricted to small nations. Other Western European powerhouses like Germany and France are beginning to see cracks forming in NATO's structure. If Washington distances itself from the alliance, a divided Europe could emerge, where countries with strong military funding take charge while smaller nations struggle to keep up. This would lead to a two-block NATO, with wealthier nations determining policy and poorer nations struggling for protection. However, Trump's alignment with Russia is more concerning across all of them. Throughout his campaign leading to his presidential victory, Trump has publicly expressed the desire to negotiate directly with Vladimir Putin, often on terms that cut short NATO's style of diplomacy. Some fear that if Trump strikes a deal with Moscow that includes scaling back NATO's presence in Eastern Europe, it could increase Russia's boldness to expand its influence in neighboring countries like Moldova or Georgia. The question now is, can NATO survive in its current form if Trump's policies continue to push European nations apart? The alliance has endured crises before, but never has it faced the real possibility of losing its most powerful member's commitment. Without the United States, NATO could transform into an entirely smaller, less cohesive, and ultimately weaker military alliance that struggles to maintain its original purpose. As NATO grapples with internal problems, the world outside its borders becomes more unstable. 3 major conflicts are shaping the future of global security: the war in Ukraine, the tensions in the Middle East, and China's growing military ambitions. Each threat demands NATO's attention, but with Trump's administration focusing on reducing US involvement, the question now is, can Europe handle these threats alone? The war in Ukraine has reached a critical point in recent years. After nearly 3 years of fighting, Russia continues its brutal assault while Ukraine fights to reclaim lost territory. Many European countries have poured billions into Ukraine's defense, but the situation remains alarming. Trump has made it clear that he intends to cut back US military aid to Ukraine, arguing that Europe should take more responsibility for funding the war. This shift has deeply unsettled NATO member leaders, who fear Ukraine may be forced into a negotiated settlement that would favor Moscow without sustained support from the United States. In early 2025, Russian forces intensified their push towards Kharkiv and Zaporizhia, attempting to break through European defenses. At the same time, Ukraine's leadership, led by its president Volodymyr Zelensky, has struggled to maintain international support as war fatigue sets in among supporting Western nations. If the US withdraws financial and military assistance, NATO may have no choice but to fill the gap on its own. While Ukraine dominates NATO's immediate concerns, the Middle East remains a constant flashpoint as the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas, along with tensions involving Hezbollah in Lebanon, has continued to draw international attention. NATO has never been a direct actor in Middle Eastern conflicts, but its alliance has long played a role in stabilization efforts. Trump's policies on the Middle East remain unpredictable so far. His previous term saw the Abraham Accords, which improved diplomatic ties between Israel and several Arab nations. However, his withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018 escalated tensions. Now, in his second term, some fear that he may take an even harder stance against Iran, potentially increasing regional instability. European NATO members are deeply divided on handling the conflict, with France and Germany advocating for diplomatic solutions. Eastern European nations like Poland and Czech Republic favor a stronger alignment with Israel and the United States. This disunity among member states makes it difficult for NATO to formulate a cohesive policy on the Middle East. If Trump distances the US from NATO operations, Europe may be forced to engage in regional conflicts without Washington's backing. However, maybe the biggest wildcard in the future of NATO remains China. While it is traditionally seen as being outside the interest of the alliance, China's growing military footprint in the South China Sea, its support for Russia, and its growing technological reach have led the leaders of NATO to consider expanding their strategic interests beyond the continent. Trump has consistently portrayed China as America's greatest rival, and if tensions between Washington and Beijing escalate, NATO may find itself caught in the middle once again. Eastern European countries, particularly those with deep economic ties to China, such as Germany, have been reluctant to take a confrontational stance. At the core of NATO's challenge is the new multipolar world order, where Russia, China, and Middle Eastern conflicts continue to pull the alliance in different directions. Without a clear and unified strategy going forward, NATO risks becoming reactive rather than proactive and caught between trying to contain global threats while struggling with its internal divisions. The world is changing fast, and NATO's future has never been more uncertain. What do you think is the future of NATO under Trump's presidency? Let us know in the comments. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep analysis. Thank you for watching.